In the Catholic understanding of the Bible, the law of God in the Old Testament is one of the most important foundations of the relationship between God and his people. The law was not simply a set of rules meant to control behavior. Rather, it was a gift from God that guided his people toward holiness, justice, and a deeper covenant with him. Through the law, God revealed his will and showed humanity how to live in harmony with him and with one another. The Old Testament presents the law most clearly in the books traditionally associated with Moses, especially Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. After freeing the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, God brought them to Mount Sinai, where he established a covenant with them. This covenant was a sacred agreement. God promised to be their God and protect them, while the people promised to obey his commandments. The giving of the law at Mount Sinai marked a defining moment in the history of salvation. At the heart of this law are the 10 Commandments, which God gave to Moses on stone tablets. These commandments form the moral core of the Old Testament law and remain central to Catholic teaching today. The first 3 commandments focus on the relationship between humanity and God, worshiping him alone, respecting his holy name, and keeping the Sabbath day holy. The remaining commandments guide human relationships, teaching respect for parents, the sanctity of life, fidelity in marriage, honesty, and freedom from greed. In Catholic theology, the 10 Commandments express universal moral truths that apply to all people in every generation. However, the law in the Old Testament goes beyond the 10 Commandments. It also includes many other regulations that governed religious practices, social justice, and daily life in ancient Israel. For example, there were laws concerning sacrifices, dietary restrictions, purity rituals, and festivals such as Passover. These laws helped shape Israel's identity as a people set apart for God. They reminded the Israelites that every part of life, even eating, working, and celebrating, could be an act of obedience and worship. Catholic teaching recognizes that the Old Testament law can be understood in 3 main categories: moral law, ceremonial law, and civil law. The moral law, especially the 10 Commandments, expresses eternal principles about right and wrong. These principles remain valid for Christians today because they reflect the natural law written by God into the human heart. The ceremonial law, on the other hand, included rituals and sacrificial practices that prepared the people for the coming of Christ. These rituals pointed forward to Jesus, whose sacrifice on the cross fulfilled and replaced the ancient system of temple sacrifices. Finally, the civil law governed the political and social life of ancient Israel as a nation, including rules about property, justice, and leadership. One of the important purposes of the law was to reveal the holiness of God by giving his commandments. God showed that he is perfectly just, pure, and righteous. The law set a standard that encouraged the Israelites to strive for holiness in their own lives, yet the law also revealed human weakness. Throughout the Old Testament, the people repeatedly failed to keep God's commandments fully. This pattern showed the need for a deeper form of redemption that would come through the Messiah. From a Catholic perspective, the law also served as preparation for Jesus Christ. In the New Testament, Jesus himself declared that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. This means that Christ brought the law to its fullest meaning. He emphasized that true obedience to God is not only about external actions, but also about the condition of the heart. For example, in his teachings, Jesus deepened the meaning of the commandments by calling people not only to avoid murder, but also to reject anger and hatred, and not only to avoid adultery, but also to cultivate purity of heart. The Old Testament law also taught the importance of justice and compassion. Many commandments instructed the Israelites to care for the poor, protect widows and orphans, and treat foreigners with kindness. These instructions reveal God's concern for human dignity and social responsibility. In Catholic social teaching today, these same values continue to guide believers in building a more just and loving society. Ultimately, God's law in the Old Testament is a story of love and covenant. It demonstrates that God did not abandon humanity after sin entered the world. Instead, he chose a people, guided them, and revealed his plan for salvation step by step. The law was a teacher that prepared humanity for the coming of Christ, who would establish the new and eternal covenant. For Catholics, studying the law of the Old Testament helps believers better understand the continuity of God's plan throughout the entire Bible. It reminds us that God's commandments are not burdens, but pathways to freedom, holiness, and life with him. Through the law, God called his people to live in faith, obedience, and love, a calling that continues for Christians today. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video.